Hello all, a great afternoon and a warm welcome to each and every one of you to this series that is the Prelims Masterclass of 2025. You know that this is Sureka Bhaskar and I am dealing with environment and ecology for you guys on behalf of Narayana IAS Academy. So here we've actually come up with a 10-day series of environment and ecology in dealing with around the topmost or the 100 most important current affair topics that are likely to appear in your prelims examination, that is the upcoming examination. And along with these current affairs topics, you know that we are also covering some significant static portions as well as a part of our discussion. So in case you are actually watching this particular video for the very first time, I would like to tell you that this is our 9th session and we have completed 8 most important sessions that are actually available on our YouTube channel, that is Narayana IAS Academy. The YouTube channel. Okay, so Narayana IAS Academy YouTube channel, you can actually find the master classes of different subjects, of which environment and ecology is also one such. Okay, so as I told you, we've actually completed 8 sessions. So it would not be of justice if I don't take you through the topics that we have actually completed in the other 8 sessions. Okay, so if you look at the number of topics that we've covered in the previous sessions, you know how important this particular course is. So it's still not too late. So we still have one more month for the prelims examination. So even now, if you're actually watching it, please do pace up and then watch this particular course diligently, because we have actually picked up the topics based on the PYQs as well as highly potential topics that can appear in your examination. So the first class we actually discussed about the ecosystems. Okay, so this particular series begun with this particular ecosystem, where the first topic was our forest ecosystem. We dealt with what are forest ecosystems and what are the different initiatives that have been come up by India, as well as what are all the other global initiatives in order to preserve the forest. Okay, so this is number one. Like we saw different initiatives like the Peace Forest Initiative, and then we saw the UN Red Initiative. We saw the wood certification program that was actually brought about, and then the international arrangement of forests. All these things we discussed. Alongside, we also discussed about the important conventions that were actually signed at the Rio Earth Summit of 1992, which were the UNFCCC, UNCCD as well as UNCBD respectively. So when it actually came into force, when India signed it, as well as when was it ratified. So this is what we dealt with. Moving on, after the forest ecosystem, we also looked into the ocean ecosystem, where we discussed two most important topics, that is your High Seas Treaty and how it is important for India to sign and ratify this particular High Seas Treaty. And then we looked at the Blue Flag certification, and which is the nodal agency which actually awards or gives this certification to the environmentally protected beaches or the protected areas of the marine ecosystem. And then we also moved on to the next kind, that is the other kinds of ecosystem. And these other kinds, here we actually discussed the mountain ecosystem, we discussed about the wetland ecosystem and the conservation status under the Ramsar Convention, etc. And we also looked at the mangrove ecosystem and how these marine ecosystems are helpful in regulating the climate as well as to mitigate the impacts of climate change. All that we saw. Then we moved on to discuss this particular topic of coral reefs. What are coral reefs? And recently the NOAA has actually warned about the fourth mass coral bleaching event. So we also looked at different types of coral reefs. Okay, so what are artificial reefs and where it has been introduced recently, that is in Rameshwaram, the Paman Island. So all that we actually discussed over here. Okay, then after this we actually moved on to discuss about the environmental organization and bodies. We saw NGT, and that is the National Green Tribunal. We saw the Indian Meteorological Department and the Central Groundwater Board. Apart from this, we discussed about the World Wildlife Fund for Nature as well as the Global Environmental Facility, which is a funding mechanism for important important conventions like the Minamata Convention, the Stockholm Convention on persistent organic pollutants, etc. Okay, then we moved forward to the most important topic, that is the climate change. Okay, so here we started with what is the concept of climate change and what are all the mitigation as well as the adaptation strategies that have been taken up by the countries across the globe as well as India. Okay, specifically with respect to the European Union, we actually looked at the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and we saw the EU nature restoration plan we actually looked into. Also we looked at the concept of carbon markets as well as carbon credits. Okay, so this is actually used as a permission slip in order to offset the emissions that you are actually bringing into the atmosphere. And then we looked at the concept of CCUS, that is carbon capture and then utilization and storage. So after looking into all these mitigation and adaptation strategies, we moved forward looking at the important climate conferences, that is the COP29 of UNFCCC. Also we discussed about the key takeaways of COP16 of UNCCD, that is to combat desertification. Apart from that, we also looked at what are all the other measures that India has actually taken in order to curb the menace of climate change. Specifically, we looked at the greenwashing guidelines that was brought about by the Central Consumer Protection Agency, that is the CCPA. We saw the eco-mark rules of 2024 that was actually brought forward by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Okay, and also we discussed programs like what? The green credit program and how it is different from that of the carbon credit program. So all these things we actually discussed under climate change. Then we moved on to the fourth topic of biodiversity, where biodiversity itself, it encompasses topics like tiger reserves, biosphere reserves, as well as eco-sensitive areas. So we discussed about tiger reserves, we spoke about the biosphere reserves by UNESCO, and then we spoke about the eco-sensitive areas. Then moving forward, we also discussed about the COP16 of the UNCBD, that is the Convention on Biological Diversity. Okay, so we also saw the updation of the national action plan, or the national strategic or action plan on biodiversity that has been updated by India in lines with the coming Montreal Protocol of Biological Diversity, where we looked at what are the 30 cross 30 targets which were actually set over here, and in lines with that, what were all the updated strategic plans of India. So this is what we actually looked in under biodiversity. Then we moved on looking at the conservation statuses of the biodiversity, right? So over there, we discussed about the Project Tiger, and in order to commemorate this Project Tiger of 1973, the Indian government came up with an international coalition that is nothing but the International Big Cat Alliance. And also we saw the Tiger Conservation Coalition, where different NGOs actually came forward in conserving this particular big cat species. Then we spoke about the Convention of CITES, that is Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna. So we discussed about the different appendices under which these 36,000 species are actually conserved. Okay, Appendix 1, 2 as well as 3. And also we discussed about the integrated development of wildlife habitat that encapsulates different conservation programs like Project Tiger, Elephant, as well as you have the Project Dolphin. So here we actually completed this particular topic of biodiversity, that is number 4. After completing the ecosystem, the environmental organization and bodies, moving forward climate change, then biodiversity. Then we moved on discussing this particular important topic as well, that is pollution. So under pollution, we discussed under 3 main heads. One is actually the air pollution, and next is your soil pollution, and next is your water pollution. And under air pollution, we discussed 3 important topics again, that is air of Anthropocene initiative, okay, in order to measure the amount of air pollution, where the scientists actually came together and they amalgamated science plus art in order to depict the pollution. Next one, we discussed about the NCAP, that is the National Clean Air Program, how cities are categorized under that, as well as the provisions, okay, of different acts we actually saw here. Then we moved on to discuss about the ground level ozone, which is also called as the tropospheric ozone. Okay, so these are the 3 different topics we actually discussed under air pollution. Then we moved forward to discuss about this particular topic, that is soil pollution. Okay, so under soil pollution, we discussed two important types of pollution. One is actually the salt affected soils. So what are these salts, and because of which what is going to be the impact on the fertility of the soil, thereby that what to say has impact on the yield or the productivity of the plant, so or the vegetation. This is what we saw. And then the concept of soil acidification is what we discussed. Then we move forward to discuss about the water pollution, that is actually caused by arsenic, that is caused by mercury as well as nitrogen. Apart from this one, we also discussed the other kinds of pollution. Let me take this space. Other kind of pollution included the light pollution, and then we also saw about the nitrous oxide budget of 2024 that was actually released, and then we saw arsenic, mercury, as well as the persistent organic pollutants, where this was found to decrease. However, the perfluoro or the polyfluoroalkyl substances, that is the PLAS, that is PFAS, have actually increased. Okay, so this is what we looked at under this particular topic of other types of pollution. So here pollution also got over. Then we moved on to waste management. Under waste management, we saw three different topics. One was actually the plastic waste management, that is how much India contributes, that is 20% of the plastic pollution is contributed by India globally. And also, what are the menace because of open burning? What is the air pollution it actually causes? How it percolates and mixes with the groundwater and causes contamination? What are the BIS, that is Bureau of Indian Standards? What are the WHO standards? All that we had actually discussed here in plastic waste management and the associated rules, because recently the plastic waste management rules of 2024 had come, and it had actually broadened the definition of the exporters, the importers, manufacturers, sellers, etc. Next, we looked at the environment, I'm sorry, the electronic waste management, that is the e-waste management, as well as the different provisions or the what to say, different legislations that were actually brought forward. And we looked at the concept of what do you mean by e-waste. Okay, then we looked at the concept of the global fund for chemicals. Okay, and here I forgot to tell, while we're discussing HG as well as the POPs, we actually had what? The Minamata Convention as well as the Stockholm Declaration, both of which India had ratified, okay, in their respective years. So this is what we actually saw, and then we moved on to the next most important. So this was sixth. The seventh was geography in news. Under geography, we just started with few of the important current affair articles that came in geography, okay. So that we will actually look at and continue with certain other topics that we had left. Okay, so there were around 3-4 topics like nor'westers, then you have the El Nino, La Nina, and there is a concept called triple dip La Nina, and why is it actually happening. And then other topics like geomagnetic storms were discussed, and the differential rotation of the sun was actually discussed. A particular mineral called ringwoodite, which was formed in the mantle, and what is its capacity to trap water or to store the water in the form of OH as well as the hydrogen ions. So all this we actually saw. Okay, so now we will discuss the other topics also in geography and move on to this particular and complete this particular key terms in news today itself, so that we have our last class tomorrow where we will be discussing this particular topic, that is species in news. There will be around 25 to 30 species in news that did not have any require any kind of conceptual clarity. Okay, you just have to prepare some mnemonics and try to remember them. That is why we had actually kept it to the last. So today let us actually start with few of the most important topics in geography. Okay, so now if you see this particular slide, yeah, so you can actually see, right, this is the Earth's magnetic field and this is the sun. So the topics with respect to geography we are going to discuss is with respect to the solar flares and how the solar winds are actually going to affect the magnetic field, and because of that what is the shock waves that's going to be created, and the stretching and the compressing of it results in the geomagnetic storm. And what are these geomagnetic storms, how it is going to disrupt life on earth with respect to the satellite communication as well as telecommunications, etc., and how is it going to impact the health of people, especially the astronauts, if they are exposed to this. All those things we will be discussing. We had already discussed also. So as I have to take you through the topics that we had already covered, so we had covered this particular topic of ringwoodite mineral, right? So this ringwoodite mineral was actually found in the mantle. Just a recap, found in the mantle. So we actually saw different layers of the earth, that is the crust as well as the mantle as well as core, and we saw the upper crust, the lower crust, which is separated by the Conrad's discontinuity, then Moho discontinuity, then Repeti discontinuity, Gutenberg discontinuity, as well as Lehman discontinuity. All that we discussed, and we saw what is the characteristic of this particular layer, that is the mantle, where you have olivine, which is that is a mineral which is subjected to extreme heat and pressure, becomes ringwoodite. And this ringwoodite actually can store water, because what, the earth's crust is actually made up of different tectonic plates, a number of tectonic plates, and because of that there is subduction, along with which the ocean water seeps to the transition zone, and that is where you find this ringwoodite. Okay, so this is what it is. We discussed about the ringwoodite mineral that is actually getting formed in the mantle. The second topic we discussed was about the differential rotation of the sun, where we actually discussed that the sun's equator, so unlike the solid objects like the earth, which actually rotates, or it takes 24 hours to rotate, where the equator as well as the pole of the earth takes the same time to rotate, right? But in case of plasma as well as gaseous substances, especially like the sun, what happens, the equator rotates faster when compared to that of the pole. So equator had actually taken 25 days to complete one rotation, where the poles had actually taken 35 days for rotation. So this was called as differential rotation of the sun, which will definitely impact other activities like the solar activities, like the sunspots, how that is going to impact the geomagnetic storm, how that is going to impact the magnetic field of the earth, all that we discussed over here. Moving forward, we took up the third most important topic, that is geomagnetic storm. So here we discussed about what the different layers of the sun, right? The core as well as the outer, the convection layer is there, the radiation layer is there, but the outermost layer of the sun is actually called as the corona. Okay, so here it is called as the coronal heating problem, where we do not know why this particular corona is more, or you can say it's the hottest part when compared to that of the core. Okay, so we saw that this corona is actually filled with the charged particles, and then what happens, the temperature actually increases, or the charges or the ionization increases so rapidly or rampantly. What happens, it actually escapes the gravity of the sun. When it escapes the gravity, solar winds are actually formed, and those solar winds are actually directed towards the earth, and there they meet or interact with the magnetic field, where it causes deviations, and there will be shock waves, there will be stretching as well as compression of the shock waves repeatedly, that will result in the geomagnetic storms, and because of which what are going to be the impact on the planet earth. Okay, so this is what we discussed under this particular concept of geomagnetic storm. Then we moved forward and discussed about one of the most important and interesting phenomena that take place in the ionosphere of the earth. Okay, so you know that the earth actually has different layers of atmosphere. So one is the troposphere, the stratosphere, then you have the mesosphere, then you finally have the ionosphere. And also we saw what is this lapse rate, normal lapse rate, that is in the troposphere, with increase in height there is actually decrease in the temperature, but in stratosphere there is temperature inversion, that is increase in height, increase in temperature, whereas again there is normal lapse rate in the mesosphere, that is increase in height and decrease in the temperature. And finally in ionosphere, again there is temperature inversion, where with increase in the height there will be increase in the temperature. So ionosphere is already very hot. So during the daytime, during the solar activity, when there is incident solar radiation, what happens, the gases are already in the form of charged ions, right? So what happens? There will be increase in the heat further. So what happens here is that it results in the formation of an electric field. Okay. So there is an electric field which actually moves in the eastward direction over the Earth's geomagnetic equator. So this is what is called as the EEJ, that is the equatorial electric jet. We also looked at why is Earth considered as a magnet. So what do you mean by the magnetic fields? Why the pole north and south had come? And then how is it oriented when it comes to the magnetic equator? So this is what we actually saw, and what is going to be the impact of EEJ, all that we discussed over here. Okay. Now, in today's session, we will be discussing few more topics. Okay. What are the topics? Let's see. First will be the concept of atmospheric rivers. Okay. So these are atmospheric rivers. So these are nothing but they actually act as this river system but in the atmosphere, that is the sky, where they carry large quantity of moisture, okay, in a particular direction, that is a ribbon of moisture laden air. So this is called as the atmospheric rivers. So why this actually happens, and this is also called as what? The Pineapple Express. Okay, so this recently happened, causing huge floods in California. So we will be discussing about what is this particular concept of atmospheric rivers. Following that, we will be discussing about the concept of katabatic as well as anabatic winds. Very, very important. Okay, so katabatic and anabatic winds, these are nothing but they are the downhill winds, that is katabatic are downhill winds, whereas anabatic are the uphill winds, and what is going to be the impact that they're going to have on the local climate of that particular region is what we will see. So we will see examples of katabatic as well as anabatic winds. Moving forward, here we will be looking at the concept of pyrocumulonimbus clouds. Pyrocumulonimbus clouds. So there we will be discussing about the concept of cloud formation. How does normally a cloud actually form, and what is the reason why the pyrocumulonimbus clouds are actually formed, whether they are disastrous or not, and how it's affecting the climatic feedback loop is what we will discuss over here. Okay, and then we will be discussing about an initiative by the Ministry of Earth Sciences, that is the Prithvi Vigyan initiative, okay, where they actually want to have the maximum benefits, that is the social benefits, then you have the economic benefits and scientific benefits because of this particular scheme. That is how they are going to enhance. This is what we will actually see here. How do you enhance the earth sciences in order to get all these benefits? Followed by that, we will also be discussing two important topics. One is on nor'westers. Okay, nor'westers is nothing but during the summers, what happens, the eastern coast of India is actually gets heated up so much in the places of West Bengal, Odisha, and these regions. What happens is there is a low pressure that actually gets created, and because of that, air from other areas actually gushes towards this low pressure, thereby resulting in this particular nor'westers. So we will look at what is the concept of nor'westers, and finally we will be discussing about this particular concept of triple dip la nina. Okay, so for this you need to understand what do you mean by ENSO, and then we will discuss about what do you mean by El Nino, and then what do you mean by La Nina. Okay, so all this we will be discussing, post which we will quickly jump into the key terms that are in news. In key terms also we will be discussing about what do you mean by Humboldt enigma, then what do you mean by carbon farming, what do you mean by carbon colonialism. Okay, so what do you mean by greenium, which is similar to that of premium that actually comes out of the conventional kind of bonds. So all that we will be discussing here. Okay, so with this we will start with our lecture for the day. Okay, so okay, good afternoon all of you, for all those who are present and who are watching this session. So let's quickly start and we will wrap it up. We don't have much time left. Okay, so let's quickly begin. Okay, so the first topic for the day is atmospheric rivers. So recently California actually experienced severe flooding, okay, and this flooding was due to a phenomena that was called as the Pineapple Express, okay. So what do you mean by Pineapple Express? It is nothing but it is referred to as the atmospheric river, okay. So let us move forward in understanding the concept quickly, okay. So Pineapple Express is a strong atmospheric river. So what is it capable is that it actually carries all the moisture from the tropics towards the western coast of the continents or the countries, okay. So that is why it is actually called as atmospheric river, and here you can see from Hawaii it actually picked up the moisture from the tropics and it moved towards the west coast of US, that is California, and there was a heavy downpour over here resulting in what? The flooding, okay. So this is what it is. So it is capable of bringing moisture from the tropics near Hawaii over to the west coast of the United States. So this is what is called as the Pineapple Express, that is nothing but atmospheric rivers. Now let us understand, can you actually see this big corridor of moisture that is actually being carried? This is not a river, okay. So here it is a corridor of moisture which is concentrated in the atmosphere. So that is why it is called as the atmospheric river. So they basically function like the rivers in the sky because they carry vast amount of water vapor outside of the tropics, okay. Very, very important. What are the characteristics? Let's say the size and the structure. So they are over 2000 kilometers long and less than 1000 kilometers wide. So length is around 2000, not very important, but width is less than 1000 kilometers, okay. And they actually have an average depth. So it is a big system that is actually moving, which is carrying moisture from the tropics towards the west coast of the continents, okay, which is 2000 kilometers long, less than 1000 kilometers in width, and finally the depth of up to 3 kilometers, okay. So they are linked with that of the low level jet streams. Jet streams are also what? These are the wind systems that is actually present in the atmosphere. So this is what it is, okay. Now moving forward, let us actually see what are the major characteristics of this particular atmospheric rivers. Number one is water content, because they carry enormous amount of water with them, isn't it? Yes. So since they carry enormous amount of water vapor, so this is approximately 15 times, okay, which is more than the volume of the water that is in the Mississippi River, okay, river's mouth, okay. So this is what it is. So with respect to water content, it is huge. With respect to the delivery of moisture, also it is actually huge, okay, because it's going to carry huge amount of moisture from the tropics, okay, to the and the high altitudes, sorry, high and the other latitudes, releasing it as precipitation, that is the rain. Next, moving forward, the significance, it enhances the global water transport, right, because it is responsible for more than 90% of the north-south water vapor transport across the globe, despite covering less than only 10% of the Earth's circumference. All this is very easy to understand, right? Nothing to explain. And also it significantly contributes to around 22% of the surface runoff, because there is huge precipitation that is associated with it, okay. So this is the concept of atmospheric rivers. Moving forward, let us see the formation process. What happens is that this is the tropics, right? So if you see, where is Africa? Yeah, this is actually the tropic. So this is somewhere your tropic of Cancer and the tropic of Capricorn, okay. So over here what happens is that there is actually heat, right? So when there is heat, what happens is that there will be warm tropical ocean waters. The temperature of the waters is actually more. So here the water will evaporate and the rise of the air actually happens into the atmosphere. So higher temperature, water will evaporate, the warm air will now gets risen, okay. Now what happens? The strong wind currents, then they actually carry the water vapor through the atmosphere over vast distances from the tropics to the other regions. The occurrence is that it actually happens in the North Pacific and the Atlantic, Then if you see the southeastern Pacific and the South Atlantic Oceans, and finally makes the landfall in North and South America and also influences the local weather conditions over there. Okay, so this is the concept of atmospheric rivers. Next, what is the impact on the climate change that this particularly has is that of late they are actually finding that this particular atmospheric rivers, that is instances of such atmospheric rivers, have increased specifically since the mid 20th century, and there are shifts in the patterns as well. So what they are saying is climate change is causing, so there is a shift in, usually what happens, these atmospheric rivers, they carry the moisture from the tropics to the other regions, right? But now what happens, due to climate change and increasing temperature, the temperature in the polar regions are also increasing, right? So these instances of atmospheric rivers are happening in the tropics, in the polar regions as well. So there are shift in these particular instances in the polar regions also, in the parts of atmospheric rivers. So thereby it is affecting the patterns of precipitation and they impact different regions. Okay, so this is what is told in this article. Next one, there is the next concept, that is pyrocumulonimbus clouds. Okay, so here these are the clouds. First let us actually understand how the cloud is formed. Okay, so when the surface gets heated up, what happens, the warm air rises. Okay, so warm air rises. So air usually holds some moisture, right? And if you see specifically, warm air has more capacity to hold moisture. So warm air can hold more moisture. So when there is more moisture in this pocket of warm air, there will be more moisture. So when they further rise to a particular altitude, what happens, it actually cools down. When it cools down, this process is called as adiabatic cooling. So when this adiabatic cooling actually happens, what happens is that this particular pocket of air will no longer be able to withstand, or what to say, adiabatic cooling, what happens, the air actually now loses its warmth, it becomes cold. When the air becomes cold, the capacity of it to hold the moisture reduces. So what happens, the cold pockets which has this moisture will expel the moisture. Okay, there is expelling the moisture is being expelled. So this moisture that is expelled, what does it do? It binds with what? The condensation nuclei which are present. Okay, so condensation nuclei, like dust particles, like any kind of aerosols, etc. So it actually, what does it do? This becomes, it binds itself to the condensation nuclei, and these condensation nuclei over a period of time, they come together and they bind together, resulting in the formation of clouds. And when this clouds actually reaches the saturation where it can no more withstand or hold the moisture content, it releases this moisture or water as rain. So this is how cloud formation actually takes place. The warmer surface, or the surface actually warms, the warm air rises up. Warm air can actually hold more moisture, but after reaching a particular altitude, this cannot hold that moisture because of the temperature. There is adiabatic cooling. Then what happens? Expels the moisture. Moisture actually binds itself to the condensation nuclei. They club together to form the clouds. The clouds, when they can no more, or when it becomes saturated, they expel the water in the form of rain. So this is how clouds actually happen. But in case of pyrocumulonimbus clouds, what happens? There is extreme amount of heat that is actually been provided or fed into the cloud formation process. Okay, so when there is more warm air, okay, for example, there are instances like forest fires on the land. Okay, so when there are forest fires, the amount of heat that is actually coming out is huge, right? So that results in more warm air which can actually hold more moisture. Okay, so the clouds, what happens, they are actually formed to such a huge extent which goes to up to so many hundreds and thousands of kilometers, and they are called as pyrocumulonimbus clouds, which also, like the cumulonimbus clouds, give out rain, but not that much of torrential downpour. That is, it won't be a what is a heavy rain. Okay, so it actually results in the dry climatic conditions also. So when it is dry and it is characterized by dry winds, okay, or strong winds, what happens? The forest fire even more what to say, for it gets further. So it is like a vicious cycle only. So what happens? Forest fires create cumulonimbus clouds, which are accompanied, or you can pyrocumulonimbus clouds, which are characterized by lightning and thunderstorms. So when the thunder is there and less rain is there, what happens? That further results in this amplification of forest fire events. Okay, so this is what we are going to discuss in this particular article. So frequent and intense wildfires triggered by rising global temperature are increasing the occurrence of the pyrocumulonimbus clouds. This again can produce thunder and can spark additional fires. Okay, so this is what this article is telling. Now let's move forward in understanding what are pyrocumulonimbus clouds. Can you see this diagram? This is actually the forest fire. So when there is forest fire, there is huge plumes of smoke that goes out. So here the plume actually cools down. When there is cooling down, I told you there is formation of cloud. But then the cloud is going on to such a huge extent because of more, the what to say, warm air that had risen up, and then it actually forms the pyrocumulonimbus clouds. Okay, which is characterized by thunderstorms as well as lightning. Lightning, how it occurs? Because of the charged particles, they come together, and that is why you have the lightning as well as thunderstorms, and that further actually comes down as downburst, but still it is not going to be a huge downburst and all. Okay, so these are also called as the fire clouds, and they are thunder clouds which are generated by intense heat from the earth's surface, such as from large fires, or it can also happen during the volcanic eruptions, and that is why these clouds look darker than usual, and they are similar to that of the cumulonimbus clouds, but they are characterized by a vigorous updraft driving. That is why the updraft is nothing but it is because of this heat that has actually been provided in extra. Okay, so that is fueled by extreme heat from the earth's surface. So this is what is called as pyrocumulonimbus clouds. So what are the formation conditions? So the air actually, or the clouds, they arise under extreme heat conditions, typically from the wildfires. However, every wildfire does not result in the formation of these particular clouds, and the temperature definitely must surpass around 800 degrees Celsius, such as the Australian wildfire, which actually took place in 2019, right? Next, the intense heat causes the hot air to rise. I already told you this lifts the water vapor, the smoke as well as the ash, and they will cool here and they will condense, okay, and forms the pyrocumulonimbus clouds, and these can grow up to a height of even 50,000 feet, and this potentially forms what? They form the thunderstorm systems which are associated with the lightning as well as strong winds. Okay, so this is the concept of pyrocumulonimbus clouds. So what happens? They can ignite additional wildfires because they are going to give out lightning. Okay, when lightning strikes the forest, what happens? It actually catches fire. Next one, that there is minimal rain over here. So this will further exacerbate the wildfires. Also, it has a generation of strong winds. When strong winds are actually there, then what happens? The fire is going to be spread further, and finally they are responsible for several aerosol pollutants also, such as the smoke as well as the ash, okay, which are present in the stratosphere and upper atmosphere. So they get trapped over there. Next one is this concept of anabatic and katabatic winds. Okay, so let us see. Okay, so any doubts so far, you can actually ask me, or else we will move to the anabatic as well as katabatic winds. Okay, so let me explain this concept and read through whatever is on the board. Okay, so Yeah, let us actually continue anabatic as well as katabatic winds. Okay, so let us consider this as the mountain. So these are mountains and these are the mountain valleys. So you have mountains and mountain valleys. So let me take another color. So what happens is that usually during the daytime, okay, so during the daytime when the surface actually gets heated, it's just a normal situation, okay. So when the surface gets heated, the warm air rises up and then it is so warm as well as it is actually light in weight, right, because it hasn't picked up much of the moisture. So it actually climbs uphill. Okay, so when it climbs uphill, what happens? These are called as the anabatic winds. And after reaching a particular altitude, what happens? There is condensation and there is formation of clouds and when there is rainfall. Okay, so these are called as the anabatic winds. Whereas if you see on the contrary, let me take you through another mountain here. So another mountain valley. So during nights when the temperature actually falls, okay, during nights when the temperature falls, what happens? The wind systems here, the wind systems over here, what happens? They actually become cold, they become heavy, and then what happens? They actually move downhill, okay, towards the valley, and these are called as the katabatic winds. Okay, so katabatic winds and anabatic winds. The katabatic winds are actually very dry in nature, that it brings about certain what to say benefits to the agriculture or any kinds of what to say cultivation that actually takes place over here. And one such example of katabatic wind is the Mistral wind system. Okay, so this actually flows through the Rhone Valley. Okay, the Rhone Valley is famous for what? It is famous for the cultivation of grapes, that is called as viticulture. Okay, so here what happens is that the dry wind that actually blows through this valley, what does it do? It is very strong also, so it actually removes much of the moisture from the grapes, so that actually making the grapes healthier as well as protects it from any kind of further fungal infection. That is why, you know, right, France or Paris known for its wine. So this is the concept of katabatic as well as anabatic winds. Other examples are also there. You have the Bora, and this is in the Adriatic Sea, and then you also have the Santa Ana, okay, California. So these are all examples of what? The katabatic winds. Okay, so now let us actually move forward and see why this particular article is in the news. Okay, so recent studies have revealed that katabatic winds play a very important role in cooling the Himalayas. Okay, fairly, are you able to understand what the concept is? Okay, now let's move forward and see what do you mean by katabatic winds. Okay, so katabatic winds, also called as drainage winds. These are very cold as well as dense winds that actually flow or they drain downhill at the nights when the temperature actually drops under the influence of gravity. It moves down. They typically occur at night. I told you Earth's surface cools heavier and they descend down, and they are also characterized by cold, dry nature, okay, and can have a significant impact on the local winds as well, I mean local weather systems as well as the ecosystem. So here you can see the katabatic winds which are draining down, and that is why I told you it supports the Rhone Valley viticulture or the vineyards, okay, vineyards. So this is the Rhone Valley. See the grapes over here. So it is actually dry in the sense that it does not allow the grapes to hold much of moisture. Okay, so it becomes what? Very conducive for the production of wine, by which the economy of the Rhone Valley actually resides. Okay, now let's move forward and understand what do you mean by the anabatic winds. The anabatic winds, as I told you, these are uphill winds, okay. So they are upslope winds that result from the heating of the surface of the earth, okay. As the sun warms the ground, the air above it actually becomes very less dense and it rises up, and these are typically associated with the regular or the fair climatic conditions, okay. Do you understand? And this can influence that way the local climates and the ecosystem, okay. So this is actually the concept of katabatic as well as anabatic winds. If you see the difference in both, so what do you mean by katabatic winds? So this is nothing but the winds that flow downhill, and these are winds that flow uphill due to the heating of air, okay. Due to the heating of air, it goes up. Next one, the cause is that the cooling of the air over high ground, typically at night, okay. So this is the reason. The next one, heating of air on the mountain slopes by the sun, typically during the day, night and the day. Temperature cooler, temperature warmer. Occurrence is what? In the polar regions. Occurrence is in the mountainous areas in the daytime. Next examples is Mistral in the Ron Valley, the Santa Ana, California, the Bora, Adriatic Sea, all that is important. So here this majorly actually happens in the Alps, the Rockies, if you see in the North American region. So this happens across the Alps as well as Rockies. The effect on weather, this also brings clear as well as dry weather, and this can lead to the formation of the cloud and thereby precipitation on the mountains, okay. So these are the comparative note on the anabatic as well as the katabatic wind system. Now let us move forward and see this particular mission, or you can say the scheme, which is called as the Prithvi Vigyan, okay. So recently the Union Cabinet has approved this particular scheme of the Ministry of Earth Sciences. This is called as the Prithvi Vigyan, okay. How do you enhance, okay. So how do we enhance this particular what to say, earth sciences, in order to get the maximum benefits, whether scientific benefits or economic benefits or social benefits, how do we get from that? So for that purpose only we have this Prithvi Vigyan, okay. So moving forward, look at this Prithvi Vigyan. I will actually zoom this and show it to you. So the Ministry of Earth Sciences recently, what to say, they aimed at advancing the earth system sciences and providing the services for what? Social benefits, environmental benefits, etc. So there are major objectives of the scheme. The first objective is that they have to, 1 minute. The first objective is that long-term observation of the earth systems, okay, whether it is your atmosphere, whether it is your ocean, the cryosphere, then the solid earth and the geosphere. So there has to be long-term observation of these different, what to say, the earth features, okay, or you can say long-term observations of the earth's different characteristics or the zones or dimensions. This is what it is. Next, you have to, after observation, you actually have to come up with the modeling systems, okay. So you have to come up with different modeling systems in order to understand, okay, how it actually functions, in order to predict what kind of weather and the changes that the atmosphere, or what to say, the oceans are actually going through, and because of which what can be the associated hazards that can rise out of it. So this is what it is. Next one, it also involves exploration of the polar regions, okay. Okay, that is the earth, I mean the atmosphere and other dimensions that we spoke about also includes what? The exploration of the polar regions as well as the high seas regions, okay. So in order to explore all those things as well as to sustainably harness the resources of these ecosystems, what we have to do? There has to be development of technology for this, okay, so that whatever benefits you get, you can actually use it, or you can use it for societal consumptions, okay. So next one, for all this you need to have knowledge, right? So there has to be translation of knowledge. So whatever knowledge you possess, there has to be translation of knowledge for the environmental as well as economic benefits. So these are the different features of this Prithvi Vigyan scheme. Now let us see what are the sub scheme across it. Okay, so what are the sub schemes which are present under this Prithvi Vigyan is, first one is across. Across, what does across stand for? Atmosphere and climate research modeling, observing systems and services. Just as how we explained here. The next one is OSMART. This depends upon the ocean services. Okay, then the modeling applications, resource and technology. Next one is spacer. This we already discussed, right? It has come up when we're discussing about Antarctic Treaty. I spoke about the national initiative. So spacer stands for polar science as well as the cryosphere research. So you already know India actually has research stations in the Antarctic, that is the Maitri as well as Bharati. Okay, now let us move forward and see the other sub schemes. Apart from the spacer etc., includes the SAGE. This includes seismology and geosciences, and finally the reach out, that is research, education, training as well as outreach. Okay, then this covers all the 5 aspects of the earth system. We saw the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the geosphere, cryosphere and biosphere. Very important. All the 5 systems of the earth are covered. Okay, then time and outlay, it will actually be implemented during the period of 2021 to 2026 with an overlying cost of around 5,000 crores. Okay, so these are the different characteristics of this particular scheme. And now let us look into what are the different benefits of the scheme. First one, it provides the warning services because it is actually observing, no, it is observing all the aspects of the earth. How is the cryosphere, how is the atmosphere, as well as how is the geosphere, how is the biosphere, etc. So after observing all that using the modeling, modeling as well as technology, it comes up with the warning system. What is the potential of any kind of hazard that can actually happen? Okay, like the cyclones, the floods, the heat waves, etc. Next one, it explores the Earth's 3 poles, the Arctic, Antarctic, as well as the Himalayas, offering valuable insights, and also promotes the development of technology, oceanic resources, and whatever you harness out of it, that has to be from the translation of knowledge. All that is mentioned over here. Okay, so this is about the Prithvi Vigyan scheme. Now let's move to the next interesting topic, that is nor'westers. So here the article is about India is developing its first research test bed to study the nor'westers. So as you can see in this particular map, during summers what happens, the land, specifically the eastern portion, the eastern side of India actually is subjected to extreme heat. Okay, so there is more heating up of the land, and the excess heating results in the low pressure. Because a low pressure is created, it attracts the surrounding wind systems, and all that actually, so the wind across will rush towards this particular low pressure zone. So that is what results in nor'westers. Let us actually see. So nor'westers are violent thunderstorms which occur in the eastern and the northeastern India during summer, specifically in states like West Bengal, Assam, Odisha and Bihar. So the winds originate due to intense heating of the land. That leads to the formation of what? Cumulonimbus clouds. There will be strong winds, there will be heavy rain as well as hailstorms which are there. And in Bengal, they are called as Kal Baishakhi. Okay, meaning calamity in the month of Baishakh. While in Assam, it is called as Bardoli Chira. So see, you have to know all these things. Bardoli Chira, don't think it's a festival. It is the name that is given for the nor'westers in Assam. Moving forward, these are destructive, that actually results in the what to say, tornadoes. Okay, the formation of tornadoes and then the damage to the property, etc. However, for cultivation of certain types of crops like the jute as well as paddy, it is very helpful. Okay, and also provides a relief because it brings the rainfall during extreme heat, right, in the northeast. Okay, so that is why it actually gives some kind of a relief in the summer. So this is the concept of nor'westers. So if you see other local winds that are actually present, north as well as west India, it is called as the Lu. What is the effect? It is the heat waves. Next, there is something called Andi. Okay, don't read it as Anandi. This is Andi. Okay, so Andi, North and Central India. So it actually results in dust storms. And then they are called as mango showers. Already a question had been asked in the UPSC examination in the states of Kerala and Karnataka, and this actually helps in the ripening of the mango fruit. That's why it's called as mango shower. And next one is blossom shower in Kerala. So this actually aids in flowering of the coffee plantation. So that is why it's called as blossom showers. So called Andi where north as well as central India. Called Lu where in the north as well as West India. Called as what? It's called as blossom showers in Kerala and mango showers in Karnataka as well as Kerala. Okay, so these are other local winds. Now, let's move to a very important topic, that is triple dip La Nina. Okay, so what do you mean by triple dip La Nina? Don't confuse that there's going to be a dip in the wind, there's going to be some angle, nothing like that. When La Nina condition actually happens or it continues for 3 consecutive years, this is called as a triple dip La Nina. Very simple. So we will actually discuss about what is this concept of ENSO, what do you mean by El Nino condition, and what do you mean by the La Nina condition. Okay, so all that we will be discussing in the upcoming in the upcoming slides. Okay, so according to a new study, a rare triple dip sorry, a rare triple dip La Nina event had different effects on air quality across India. So how triple dip La Nina is going to affect the air quality? See, that is not important right now. What is important for us to understand the basics of ENSO, okay, and ENSO oscillations. 1 minute. This is what we write, yeah. El Nino Southern Oscillations, and then we will be discussing about what do you mean by El Nino condition, what do you mean by La Nina conditions, okay. So, imagine this is your Americas, okay. So, this is your North America and this is your South America, okay. And then here you actually have your Australia, and then here and all you have your what to say, Japan, Asia and all. So this region, okay, the western coast of America or the western coast of the Americas and the eastern coast of Asia as well as Australia. So in between this is what you call as the Pacific Ocean, isn't it? This is the Pacific Ocean. So what happens in this Pacific Ocean? For that you need to understand the planetary winds first. I'll tell you. So this is the equator, okay. So the earth actually is characterized by planetary winds which are of 3 types. One is actually the trade winds and the other is called as the westerlies. The third is called as polar easterlies. Now we will be dealing with what is trade winds. The trade winds actually blow in the northeastern direction. So these are called as what? The northeast trades. So these are basically trade wind systems, okay. So northeast trades and the ones in this direction are called as the southeast trades because they come from the southeastern direction. So what do they do is that as they actually blow in this direction across the globe, they push the water from the tropics from what? The east to the west. So they are actually pushing the surface of water in this particular direction. So when that continues here also, what happens? There will be movement of water from or the warm water from the eastern Pacific to the western Pacific. Let me mark that in different color. So this is what? Your Pacific. This is your eastern Pacific and this is your western Pacific, okay. So what happens is that these trade winds actually move the water from the eastern Pacific to the western Pacific, okay. So first we will consider that this is the normal condition. So when the water that is actually warm, it is moved from the eastern Pacific to the western Pacific, then what happens? There will be accumulation of, what to say, the warm water here, and results in the formation of what? The warm western Pacific pool. Okay, so when the situation is warm, what happens? It results in the formation of low pressure. Because of low pressure, the air actually rises. Okay, so this rises, and then what happens? This is carried over here and it sinks. So here it becomes heavy, and this is called as high pressure. So low pressure means what? It actually rises. There is conduction, there is what to say, the condensation that is actually happening here. There is cloud formation that is happening here, that results in precipitation over this particular area. So your western Pacific, that is nothing but eastern coast of Australia, is actually having what? It is having rain. Whereas here it is dry, and there is drought like condition in the western coast of the Americas. So this is the normal condition. At the same time, when this normal condition intensifies beyond an extent, then that condition is called as La Nina. Okay, for example, if this trade winds become extremely strong, okay, it becomes too strong, then what happens here? It actually pushes more of hot water from this particular eastern Pacific to western Pacific. Then there is a large low pressure zone which is over here. So increase in the rising up of warm air, then cloud formation, and there is heavy downpour in this particular area. Thereby what happens? Flooding actually takes place in Australia. Whereas over here what happens? Here there will be severe drought condition. Okay, so this is called as La Nina condition. On the contrary, for reasons unknown, if this if these trade winds actually weaken. Okay, so let us look at that condition also. So let me take you through that figure again. So this is North America, this is South America, this is your Australia, and this is your Asia. Okay, so this is your Pacific, and here you actually have what? Your Eastern Pacific, and here you have your Western Pacific. Trade winds are moving, they are moving the hot water, they are moving the warm waters from here to, from the Eastern Pacific to the Western Pacific. Okay, so this is what generally happens, but for unknown reasons, what will happen now is that this will weaken. There is weakening of the trade winds. Okay, so when the trade winds weaken, what happens is that it cannot push the warm water to this extent. Okay, it cannot push it till this extent. Instead, it pushes only to this limited extent. So here there will be, what to say, accumulation of what? The warm water, because of which the air will rise up. There will be cloud formation and precipitation in the western coast of America itself, that is in the Eastern Pacific. So because of which El Nino condition, what will happen here? There will be rain over here, and here there will be droughts and dry condition. So this is your El Nino condition. And when the La Nina actually occurs thrice, what happens in 3 consecutive years? This is called as the triple dip La Nina. Now let's quickly get into and understand what is given in the content here. Okay, so the study was actually conducted by the researchers at the National Institute of Advanced Studies. Not very important. And let's see what is the term triple dip La Nina. So triple dip La Nina, it refers to the rare occurrence of 3 consecutive years of La Nina conditions in the Pacific Ocean. Okay, so this is what is called as triple dip La Nina. Now let us understand what is the ENSO, that is El Nino Southern Oscillation. Okay, so it is an irregular periodic variation. What variation? In both the winds as well as the sea surface temperature over the tropical Eastern Pacific region that affects the climate of much of the tropics and the subtropics. It has 3 phases. One is the El Nino phase, where what? It occurs when the surface water temperature in the eastern Pacific becomes warmer than usual. Eastern Pacific is what? The west coast of America. That becomes warmer. Whereas La Nina, what happens? When the temperature in the eastern Pacific is cooler than usual. Whereas in neutral, the sea surface temperature in the eastern Pacific are close to average, that is with no significant warming or cooling. So this is what are the three different phases of your ENSO, that is the El Nino Southern Oscillation. So you can see here, you can actually see the trade winds over here. These are the trade winds. Okay, so these are trade winds that actually move this particular warm water, right? And there is, because of upwelling, there is actually cold water from the bottom actually moves up. Okay, I'm writing in yellow, I did not notice it. Yeah, so there is upwelling, the trade winds actually moves it over here. So there is extreme warm condition over here. There is what? There is low pressure over here. So air rises, then there is actually cloud formation and there is precipitation in this particular area. Okay, so that is why Australia actually gets what? It gets rainfall, whereas this place remain comparatively cold. Okay, and there is high pressure which is over here. So this is a neutral condition, but then when this intensifies further, let us see what is going to happen. Okay, when this intensifies further, then the trade winds are extremely, they are very strong. So there is too much of warmer condition, too much of warm air rising and precipitation, that actually causes what? Flooding in Australia, whereas there is extreme drought like condition in the Western American region. Whereas in the El Nino condition, what happens? The trade winds actually weaken. That is why most of the warmer than normal actually takes place in the eastern Pacific itself. Thereby, the western coast of America actually remains significantly warm. Okay, whereas there is drought like condition because there is upwelling and cooler than normal. Okay, so this is what is your El Nino as well as ENSO conditions. Now, let us actually, I put this in the form of a tabular column. Let's understand this one. So the meaning of El Nino is little boy or Christ child in Spanish, whereas La Nina means little girl in Spanish. Okay, so La Nina, little girl in Spanish. So I don't know why these are very gender specific. Anyways, let us actually see. Maybe El Nino. Okay, fine. Let me not pass any comments. Okay, so sea surface temperature here. So above the average sea surface temperature across the east central what is the equatorial Pacific, and here there is below average sea surface temperature across the east central equatorial Pacific. Next one, the pressure, there is high air surface pressure in the western Pacific. Yes, we saw that, right? In the western Pacific there is actually high pressure, that is towards Australia. Here there is low pressure in the eastern Pacific. Don't confuse, just follow the concept that I had told you. Okay, normal condition, when normal becomes even more, little more triggered, then that becomes La Nina, and opposite of the normal is El Nino. That's it. Okay, so during El Nino, the trade winds actually weaken. So what happens? Warm water is pushed back east towards the west coast of Americas, resulting in a weaker Walker cell. So the cell over here, which we saw, the regulation, the rising as well as the sinking of the air, and the cold Peruvian Humboldt current gets replaced by the warm El Nino, that is called as the Cromwell current. Okay, here during the La Nina events, the trade winds are even stronger than usual. I told you, than usual. So thereby resulting in stronger Walker cell. Now, if we move forward, the period of occurrence is around 3 to 5 years and lasts for every 3 to 5 years it actually occurs. So typically occurs every 3 to 5 years, and it consists for, it actually extends for around a year. Here typically occurs every 3 to 5 years, and 1 to 3 years is what it actually stays for. Okay, lasts. The next one, impacts. It brings droughts in eastern Australia, flooding in southern America, and also weak upwelling over the west coast of South America. All this we have discussed, right? And here excessive rainfall in the eastern Australia, and then drought conditions prevail in South America, as well as strong upwelling is over there over west coast of South America. Next one, what is the impact of El Nino and La Nina on Indian monsoon, it becomes very, very important. So, the monsoon, this is El Nino, right? This is El Nino. So, the monsoon is affected so heavily that 70% reduction of the rainfall is expected. Okay, and the winds don't carry the moisture towards the Indian landmass. Yes, no, during this condition, they are so weak, they don't carry. So, what happens? 70% reduction of the rainfall is there during El Nino year. So, so that there is actually deficiency in the rainfall. Whereas La Nina actually causes high temperatures over the Indian Ocean of the Somalian coast, and comparatively, if you see, the monsoon rains are better during the La Nina seasons. Okay, so here we've actually completed what you call as the concepts of El Nino, La Nina, and the ENSO and the different phases. Any doubts you have so far? You can actually post it. Okay. So after this, we can actually take off. There are few simple terms that we will be discussing that were in use just for you to understand. Okay. So we can actually move about very, very quickly. So we've completed almost 90% of environment and ecology, and also important geography concepts that were in the news. Okay. For the past 1.5 years, from the January 2024 till March 2025. If you want further updates, please do visit our website, and there you can actually download under the current affairs section. You can download our Navigator monthly magazine as well as the yearly compilations. Okay, so after the prelims examination, immediately we will be coming up with the main scores as well. So please stay tuned, because we have a group of experts who actually analyze the papers like the PYQs, etc., and then we come up with extremely highly researched as well as curated content, which are very, very important for the examination. Do you understand? So rather than being lost in the vast expanse of the syllabus, you need to know where you are actually traveling. So for that, we also have a strategic micro schedule where it's a day-to-day plan we will actually provide you, so that your time does not get wasted. Okay, so having said this, let's quickly move to the next topic. Let us just have a 1 minute break. Let's have some water and then continue with the important concepts or the important terms that were in news. Okay, so let us actually start with our important terms in news. First one is carbon farming. Here I'll be little fast because there's nothing much to understand. You just have to know these key terms, because sometimes if they ask like a one-liner that carbon farming, which is recently seen in news, relates to which of the following statements, you need to know it. Okay, so what do you mean by carbon farming? This is nothing but any kind of agricultural practices that you actually take. Here you are trying to capture or sequester the atmospheric carbon dioxide. Okay, and you're trying to store it in the soil as well as in the vegetation. So that is what is called as the carbon farming. Okay, so here it is trying to mitigate the impact of climate change over here, and also to increase the productivity. Okay, what productivity? The agricultural productivity. And that is why in COP21, that is what your Paris Agreement, we actually had this 4 per thousand initiative. Okay, that is reduction of carbon dioxide to 4 parts per thousand. So this is what it is, the role of soil carbon sequestration in mitigating the impacts of climate change. Okay, so this is what it is. For that, you have different methods. Okay, so if you're not able to see, let me quickly tell you the practices of carbon farming. First, of course, is rotational grazing. Okay, so instead of focusing the livestock on one patch of land, you actually take them to the other patches as well. So this is one of the reasons why the vegetation won't be depleted, so that the carbon that is stored remains intact. So that is rotational grazing. Next one is conservation agriculture. So this is where you actually use different methods like crop diversification, rotation of crops, or no tillage, all those things, so that you don't pull out the carbon dioxide that is actually stored over here. Okay, and this will also improve the retention of the soil and increase the organic content when you minimize the disturbance that you cause to the soil. Next one is agroecology. Okay, so you are trying to diversify the crops and implement the intercropping. Okay, intercropping is growing different types of crops together. So this also improves your ecosystem resilience as well as mitigates the impacts of climate change. Next one, agroforestry. Of course, you are trying to incorporate the trees as well as other kind of vegetation in the agriculture practices that you are doing. Okay, so this diversifies the income also to the farmers, whereas at the same time it sequesters carbon as well. Next one, integrated nutrient management. So more you can say more often you have to focus on reducing the synthetic or the application of synthetic fertilizers and try to use organic fertilizers. Next one, wetland restoration. We saw, right, wetland, where especially you can see mangroves and all, they actually store significant amount of peatlands, can store so much amount of carbon dioxide. So you have to take up that. Okay, so this is what this particular topic, that is this carbon farming, says. Next one is carbon colonialism. Carbon colonialism is very easy. Okay, so this is nothing but it is an inequitable dynamic. What do you mean by inequitable dynamic? So inequitable dynamic means, can you look at this picture where you see very wealthier nations or the historical polluters. So people, that is the wealthier or the developed countries, have polluted just for their industrial during their industrial revolution and all, and now they are actually passing on the burden of decarbonization efforts on what, the developing as well as the underdeveloped countries, specifically those in the global south. Okay, so global south is what? Global south is nothing but it is a geopolitical concept that actually arose. Okay, so this arose as a result of what? The inequalities that was actually caused created between the developed and the developing nations. So these global south actually refers to the number of countries which are Australia, sorry, not Australia, the some parts of South America, and then you have Africa, Asia, etc. So these are below this particular north, and this is called as the Brand line that separates the global north, that separates global south from the global north. Okay, so here there are income inequalities, there is actually poverty, then resource constraints, there are actually skill constraints, everything is here. Okay, so this is the global south. So now you're putting the burden on the developing or the least developed countries, is what this article says, and that's what is carbon colonialism. Okay, where wealthier developed nations, you put the burden of the decarbonization into the developing into the developing countries, and you're using market mechanisms. You simply say that we are offsetting carbon. What do you mean by carbon offset? That is any particular industry or a country, for example, take the Americas, for so much amount of pollution or the emission they cause, they say that we are investing so much in planting trees, in supporting the renewable energy projects, but that is not going to solve the problems, right? So that is what this article says. Okay, so it is effective in creating a market for emission reduction. It is just creating a market for emission reduction, but in the true sense it's not doing anything. Okay, then embedded emissions, where the developed countries they outsource the carbon intensive production also. What do? If they want to produce steel or if they want to produce fertilizer, what do? They'll easily call up and say, India, I'm going to import this from you people. So they will import from us, and then at the end of the day on the table, we will be the polluters, because steel, fertilizers, cement, etc. actually requires enormous amount of emissions. Okay, so this results in enormous amount of emissions. So this is what is called as carbon colonialism. Next one is paleoclimatic studies. Very easy, don't focus what's on the board. So studying the earth's climate throughout the life of the earth, so far what and all have been the variations in the climatic conditions of the earth. So they are actually studying all this in order to understand the climate dynamics. Okay, for that there are different proxies are actually involved over here. Proxies are nothing but they are the imprints that are left behind by the past climates. For example, if you take a technology called as dendrotechnology, you have seen these rings on the trees, right? When you cut the tree, you can actually see the rings. By studying those rings, for example, if the rings are far away, that actually means the climate when this tree was growing was what? It was warmer and wet. When the rings are close, it actually means it was colder and dry. So this dendrotechnology was actually used. Next one, the organisms. Okay, so the isotopic composition of the organisms was studied. What do you mean by isotopic composition? It's very simple. You have elements like oxygen, hydrogen, etc. Right? So these elements, all the elements are actually made up of atoms, and these atoms comprise of what? Protons as well as neutrons. And there are always equal number of protons as well as neutrons. But in some cases, what happens? The neutrons in the atom slightly vary when compared to that of protons. They are not same. It can either be more or it can be less. Okay. So here, this is called as isotopes. For example, you take oxygen. Okay. So oxygen, it has number of protons is equal to 8. Number of neutrons is equal to 8. So in this case, sorry, P is small. Okay, so here it is called as O16. In another case, see, if number of protons is equal to 8 and neutrons is equal to 10, here it's going to be what? O18. So here both are oxygen, both are elements of oxygen only, but their weight actually varies. This is called as isotopes. Okay, so the variations in the element is called as isotopes. Okay, even by understanding the isotope composition of the organisms, they can actually study the climate. Okay, so isotopes of what organisms? Like diatoms, as well as this foraminifera, as well as the blue green algae, all those things are there. Next, sediments and rocks. So you can actually see the sediments and the rocks, they have been deposited over a period of time, right? Some hundreds or even millions of years. So by looking at the composition and the type of layering or the type of rocks, they can actually determine what kind of climate was earlier there. Also, ice sheets and cores. Ice cores are nothing but they are cylinders of ice. They are actually grilled from that of these ice sheets as well as icebergs in order to see what kind of atmospheric composition and temperatures were actually there. And for this also they do the isotopic analysis. Okay, so this is what is known as the paleoclimatic studies and climate proxies. See, dendrochronology, the rings that are present in the cross section of the tree. Next, organisms. Here, diatoms are actually taken. The isotopic composition is studied. Isotopic composition. The next one, you have the ice cores. Here also, the isotopic analysis is done, and then the sediments as well as the rocks. Okay, so this is the paleoclimatology. Now let us actually move forward to the next topic, junk carbon credits. So this is also easy. I told you carbon credits is like a permission slip that they give you in order to offset your emissions. For example, if I'm a company and if I have to emit only 1 ton of carbon, but if I have emitted 2 tons of carbon, so in order to offset that, I have to pay the price for polluting, right, and pay the price for emitting the greenhouse gas into the atmosphere. So I have to buy these carbon credits. In case if I am a company where I have actually reduced my emission, okay, for example, I am just producing only half of 1 ton. Okay, then what happens? I can actually sell this in the carbon market to someone else who wants to offset their emissions. So this is called as the carbon credits and the mechanism. But there is something called as the junk carbon credits. Okay, so this kind of junk carbon credits, they do not represent any kind of genuine or additional permanent reductions in the GHG. Okay, they do not show genuine reductions in GHG because they actually arise from those kind of projects which would have actually run even without being financed from the carbon markets. Okay, they overstate the emission reduction targets, but then they do not follow it, and because they also furnish the inaccurate calculations, then they fail to deliver long term benefits, because there are reversal of emissions itself. They say that in order to offset my emission, I'm going to plant 1,000 trees, but then what they're going to say, in the next round of development of or extension of my industry, I'm going to cut down these many trees. Okay, so this continues. Okay, so that is why there is a reversal of emission reductions in terms of deforestation, etc., as well as afforestation projects. So that is one term. Next one, very important term, Humboldt's enigma. So don't look at this and get scared. Let me tell you what is Humboldt's enigma. This is actually a term, or the word was actually coined after Alexander von Humboldt. Okay, so he was a German geographer, right? So what did he say? He actually observed the biodiversity in the mountainous regions. So usually what we know, the equatorial region, where there is sufficient water, sunlight, precipitation, etc., what happens, there is more biodiversity, or the number of species are there, there's more diverse species which are actually living there, is what the, what to say, the understanding is. But what happens when he actually observed the mountainous regions, he found that mountains actually accommodate more diverse ecosystems. Okay, so this was very, very surprising, and that is why this is called as the Humboldt's enigma. Okay, so you can actually see the forest ecosystem. It actually hosts around to up to 1,000 meters. It actually hosts the sub-equatorial rainforest. It also has evergreen forest. It has deciduous forest. It has coniferous forest, the subalpine, the alpine meadows. And as you go up, this is the Himalayan zones. Okay, high altitude zones of Himalayas. And as you go, you have the Mount Everest. Okay, so from the forest, it actually hosts diverse biodiversity. Okay, so that is why it's an enigma. Okay, so it is called as Humboldt enigma. Okay, so this is what it is called. Now, let us actually move on to the next topic. This is nothing but planetary boundaries. Okay, so this is nothing but, it is the threshold up to which what? This is the threshold that in case if you actually cross this threshold, then there will be irreversible changes, and this change will cause significant risks to the ecosystem. So this is what is called as planetary boundaries. So set of environmental thresholds, if crossed up, it will actually cause a risk to the human species as well as the stability of the planet. Okay, so the planetary boundaries framework, this was first proposed in the year 2009, important, by a group of international scientists, not important. Okay, so if you see here, every section over here actually indicates one aspect. This is your biogeochemical flows. You have your carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, water cycle, etc. Let me zoom it for you people. Okay, so every section, if you see, this is your biogeochemical flows. Then you have the use of fresh water, the land system, then how is the integrity of the biosphere, and this sphere is actually talking about the climate change. This is again, it's not yet quantified. This talks about the depletion of stratospheric ozone. This talks about the atmospheric aerosols, the ocean acidification, etc. So every segment or aspect by which the earth actually what to say, it runs, that has a particular threshold. Okay, so this is that particular threshold. So as far as you are inside here, then what happens, you are safe. In case if you breach that threshold and if you move till this extent, that means the rate of uncertainty or the risk is actually increasing, and further beyond, what happens is that this is beyond the zone of uncertainty, that is a high risk zone. So this is what is called as the planetary boundaries. Okay, so this is simple. It is a set of environmental thresholds, and if you actually cross it, that can lead to irreversible changes. You can't even reverse it, and that's going to cause a huge impact on the health of human beings as well as the sustainability of the planet. So this is the planetary boundary. Next one is greenium. Greenium. Have you any idea about the premiums? What happens? There are bonds. Okay. For example, if the government actually wants some money for the infrastructure development. Okay. So what do? They issue bonds, and these bonds actually carry a maturity, maybe 1 year or 2 year, etc. And at maturity, the government will give you something called as the premium, that is the profit or additional money that you can earn by investing in this particular bond. So this is called as premium, and this actually happens in this government bond. It happens in the case of traditional bonds. The same way, if a company or if the government actually wants to focus on the environmentally sustainable projects, then what happens? It issues something called green bonds, and here the premium is what you call it as the greenium. Okay, and here the yield, or you can say the additional profit that is you're going to get out of this project, is comparatively lesser when compared to that of your conventional bonds, but still people come forward and they invest in it. Why? Because they want environment sustainability. Okay, so greenium is the premium or the lower yield that the investors accept when buying the green bonds compared to the conventional bonds also saw. So here we can actually understand the demand of environmentally sustainable investments. Okay, so here the government ultimately has to pay only lesser percentage of this greenium, right? So they are getting cheaper loans or they are getting cheaper money. So this is beneficial for them, is what this particular term is saying, and that is what is called as the greenium. Okay, now let's move forward. Understand what is water credit. Water credit is nothing but it is the same kind of the term, that is carbon credits. Okay, so this is also what water credit is, also any kind of a permit or the incentive that allows the entities in order to save, to trade or invest in water conservation projects. Okay, so they also function like carbon credits in order to promote sustainable management of water. They want to reduce the wastage of water or the consumption, and they focus on replenishing the water sources. Okay, so thereby there is actually equitable use of water. So it is like a cycle. So here there is a conservation target that is actually set. If you go beyond it, then what do? There is water offset credits that you buy, and in case if your project is sustainable, then what happens? You actually use the water. If it is sustainable, then okay, you can sell these credits, or you actually have to buy more of the credits. Okay, so this is what is the term of water credits. Okay, now let's move to the next one, called as Keeling curve. Keeling curve, sometimes seen in news, is actually the measure of unemployment and poverty, if they ask like that, or it is it actually depicts the inequality. Okay, so like the Gini coefficient, so something like that. Don't get confused. Keeling curve is nothing but it is a graph that actually that marks or depicts the continuous rise of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So since 1958, okay, so this is called as the Keeling curve. This was named after Charles David Keeling. It is based on CO2 measurements, okay, from Mauna Loa, and Mauna Loa, you know that, right? So Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, and this basically highlights the impact of human activities on climate change. So if you actually see here, the year is depicted on the x-axis, whereas your carbon dioxide emissions parts per million is depicted in the y-axis, and here it actually records since 1958 levels it has been recorded, and here it is 2020. Do you understand? So we have increased this much. Okay, look at the emission that we have created. So this is the Keeling curve. Now moving forward, teal carbon. Teal carbon is nothing but it's something like the blue carbon. This is teal blue, right? Teal blue. Yeah. So teal carbon and blue carbon are similar to the amount of carbon that is actually sequestered or stored by the marine or the freshwater ecosystems, okay, such as it can be lakes, rivers, wetlands, peatlands, etc. So this is similar to the blue carbon, that is the coastal ecosystems. Okay, and the green carbon, which is actually the forest. So this actually plays an important role in sequestering the carbon dioxide. Don't think since it's steel carbon, it's a different type of carbon. ऐसे कुछ नहीं है. So it is just like your regular carbon that is sequestered or stored by your marine ecosystem. Understood? Or the freshwater ecosystem further. Next one. So this is steel carbon. Let's see what is the next thing. Next is the concept of kallakadal. What do you mean by kallakadal? So this particular term has been in news, and this is a term that has been a Malayalam term that actually means kallan means thief, okay, and also kadal actually means sea. That means the sea actually has suddenly come out just like the thief. That's what it actually means. Ocean that arrives like a thief. So this is what is kallakadal. So this is nothing but it is a series, or it is a series of waves, okay, which are actually very, very long, which comes and hits the coast of Kerala, and that actually caused coastal flooding. And this particular term kallakadal was accepted by the UNESCO in the year 2012. Okay, so this is what it is. It is different from tsunami. Okay, so if you see, normally the waves are very short. If you see waves in the ocean, they are very short, and they are driven by the movement of the wind that actually acts over that particular surface of water. Okay, so this is what is known as the wind waves. When the direction of winds are like that, then you actually have these short as well as pointed waves. These are called as the wind waves. Whereas when a storm has actually occurred in some other place, because of which what happens is that your wavelength of the wave actually increases. Okay, and also you have the long as well as smooth waves, the energy of the waves is actually swollen. That is called as the swell waves. Okay, so this is different, that is this kallakadal is different from the concept of tsunami. Don't think both of them actually causes damage to life and property. It is the same, because tsunami is because of what? The underground or the ocean floor tremor, or due to the earthquake, okay, where there is actually focus, and then the shock waves actually travel, and then there is the epicenter, and there is damage on the surface. Okay, so that is called as tsunami. Whereas these swell waves are not same as that of tsunami. It is actually a resultant wave of the storm that has happened elsewhere. Okay, so distant storms, where because of which the ocean swells. So this is what is called as kallakadal. Now let's move to the next one, equatorial plasma bubbles. If you see equatorial plasma bubbles, don't actually think that it is something related to that of physics. Yeah, there is of course physics and science involved. Don't think something happens over the equator on the surface of water. Don't imagine. Okay, so bubbles not essentially is associated with water. So what happens, right, there are there are different layers of atmosphere. So this is earth, this is the troposphere, I told you. So here normal lapse rate, here stratosphere, inversion, temperature inversion, mesosphere, ionosphere. So this ionosphere is characterized by what? Gases. It is also, or the charged ions, which is also called as what? Plasma. Okay, so what happens specifically after sunsets over the equatorial region, there is unevenness in the concentration of these plasma or the charged ions. Okay, so when there is unevenness, what happens is that it suddenly rises up like in the form of bubbles. Okay, so equatorial plasma, irregularities in the Earth's ionosphere, especially after the sunset in the equatorial region. This is due to the density variation of the plasma, and that causes signal variation. Okay, so these bubbles actually rise to high altitudes and are influenced by geomagnetic activity. Not important. Just know what is equatorial plasma. Can you actually see? This is how the equatorial plasma actually takes place, and how it goes like the ripples of bubbles above. So this is what it is. Okay, next one, zero shadow day. Of course, this is very easy, right? when the sun is actually overhead. So when the sun is directly overhead at noon, then it casts no shadow behind or towards your side. Okay, so that is called as zero shadow day. This basically happens twice a year. Yeah, twice a year in locations between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. That is 23.5 degree north, that is Tropic of Cancer, and 23.5 degree south, Tropic of Capricorn. Do you understand? And then that's it. You just have to know this. A small homework is that please read about what is the concept of equinox, because it deals with the movement of the sun, right? And also you have to know the different kinds of solstice. Okay, so now this is the zero shadow day. Next, moving forward, heat dome. Heat dome is nothing but, see, the surface of the land heat. Okay, so when there is actually summer or when there is increase in the temperature, the surface actually heats. Here warm air rises. So warm air will rise. There is low pressure here, and due to climatic conditions, in case if there is a high pressure that actually exists over here, what happens? This further results in sinking of the air, and here the air is trying to rise, so there is no escape of this warm air. Thereby a lid like situation is actually created where it compresses all the heavy as well as the warm air also, leading to a heat dome. Okay, and this also results in heat waves, droughts, etc. So a heat dome occurs when a high pressure system, see, this traps the hot air over a region for an extended period, so preventing the heat to escape. So this actually leads to prolonged extreme temperature, resulting in heat waves, droughts, etc. And heat domes intensify due to the climate change and can cause severe health hazards. Okay, so this is what it is. Okay, so here you can see this is actually the dome which is here. There is air which is rising up, but still what happens? The high pressure conditions, they push the warm air down and does not let it to rise. Okay, so this is what is the topic of heat dome. Next is the grasshopper effect. Why this is called as a grasshopper effect? This is because it is a particular process. Okay, so what happens is, here you have the particulate matter, or you can say the POPs. So here the persistent organic matter, wherever it is actually, which are suspended in the atmosphere, if there is a region of high temperature, it actually becomes very volatile and it evaporates and it gets carried away by the local winds or the wind system. And then when it actually reaches the, what to say, colder regions, it again, what does it do? It actually cools down. Okay, so the process where the pollutants, that is the POPs, they travel long distances through the cycle of evaporation and condensation. So over warm region it is rising, then here it is moving by the air or the winds, and on the colder regions this actually condenses. Okay, so this is the process of, what to say, the grasshopper effects. And if you see hotter equatorial region, it is less volatile, and here it is more volatile, and then it actually condenses here. This is called as grasshopper effect. Okay, and finally what does it do? This actually accumulates in the polar regions and affecting the ecosystems over there, because the concentration becomes more in this particular region. Okay, next let us move to the next topic, blue hole. What do you mean by blue hole? This is nothing but, it is a very large as well as a deep underwater cavern, or it is also called as a sinkhole. Can you see this? Because of erosion of limestone, this particular the structure actually gets formed. Okay, so why erosion of limestone? When during the past glacial periods. Okay, so this is mainly found in the coastal as well as the oceanic regions. Okay, and for example you have the great blue hole in Belize, a country in Central America, and the one in South China Sea, that is the dragon hole. So this is basically because of the erosion. The agent is erosion here. Next one is cold lava. Cold lava is very easy. Okay, so whatever is the molten substance that is actually coming out from your mantle is called as your magma. And once it comes outside, okay, through the vents or volcanic eruptions, it is called as the lava. So this is also called as the lahar. This is nothing but it is fast moving volcanic mud flow, and that actually consists of ash, debris, some amount of water, etc. This happens when the volcanic material mixes with heavy rainfall. So when the volcanic material is mixing with rainfall or ice, etc., then what happens, it actually flows like a river, causing damage to property. Okay, so this is what is called as cold lava. Now let us move further. Corset flows and the early warning system for all, EW4 for all, that is early warning for all, and corset flows both have been adopted at COP 27 Sharm el Sheikh, Egypt, which was actually held. You need to know the location. COP 29 where? Baku, Azerbaijan. Okay, 21 where was it held? What was it? Okay, all that you need to know. Corset flows nothing but it stands for Community Sourced Impact Based Flood Forecast and Early Warning System. This is nothing but it is a flood forecasting mechanism. Okay, and this was developed by UNICEF's venture capital funding. What is venture capital? Here the investors actually invest in very new as well as small developing companies which have a higher risk of failing. Okay, so this is what it is, that is venture capital. You basically crowd fund. Okay, next one, it has it integrates artificial intelligence and machine learning, as well as different types of data are used in order to predict the flood system. Launched in 2022 as well as at what? COP 29. The next one, if you see, this is also early warning for all. This is a UN led initiative. Again, it launched in COP 27 Egypt. And next one, it is to ensure universal multi-hazard early warning system. Again, early warning only. And this is led by a number of institutions, that is WMO, World Meteorological Organization. You have the UN DRR, that is Disaster Risk Reduction, that is United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, International Telecommunication Union, and finally you have IFRC. Okay, so all these are there in order to strengthen the disaster preparedness. Do you understand? And next one, through the knowledge that you have, and then advanced forecasting, timely alerts, and etc., so that you what to say, mitigate the impacts of climate change. Do you understand? So these are the terms. Yes. So with this, we've actually completed this particular lecture where we discussed different topics of geography, and then we actually closed it with the number of terms that become very important for the upcoming prelims examination. So here we are closing on the 9th session of the prelims masterclass on environment and ecology. So tomorrow will be the last session where how much ever species in news we can take up, we will definitely take up. Do you understand? And we have this Narayana IAS Academy app where these lectures will be there, and also in case you guys actually need the PPTs, that is also provided alongside class wise. Okay, so please do subscribe, like, share and subscribe, and do follow this course diligently so that you'll be able to qualify. Okay, so thank you so much. I will meet all of you again in tomorrow's live session. Thank you.